whom, as far as that, in case everyone didn't hear, 2 people got all 50 of the states. That would be Finn and Walker. Sorry, Walker. What was I going to say? I don't do a whole lot of public shaming. But I'm not sure if it was the heat of the moment. But somebody got Alaska and Hawaii mixed up. I'm not going to say who it was. I'll pass it all back, and you can do what you want with that. I appreciated Logan's approach when he didn't know the state. He gave a characteristic: corn, cold, colder. That was fun to grade. I hope that many of you really honestly know that Washington, D.C. is not a state. It's not a state. There is a state called Washington, but it's on the other side of the continent, the continent. All right, so I'm done with that part of my job. So here we go. We're on page 2, and we have begun what will become a almost 4-year nightmare for the United States and all of its citizens, whether they're citizens of the United States or citizens of the Confederate States of America. So on page 2, we were really we didn't get too far with that, and we began looking at the border states and the significance of these border states. Okay, the border states are figuratively and literally the border. They are the border between the Confederate States of America and the United States, and figuratively, they make up that group of people in those states that see the intent purpose of following the Constitution. And that, again, is why these border states do not secede. And it is incredibly important throughout this whole duration that, it's Dr. Jenkins. Hello? Sure. Bye-bye. Laura, it's you. Oh, you know. Okay, so that's good. Okay. I never get those calls usually in my AP class. I hope you win a prize. Yay. So the whole entire time of the Civil War, Lincoln has to, for lack of a better word, appease these southern states. And these border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and then later on West Virginia. You need to know those states. I always forget West Virginia, but it's Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. You need to make sure you know those states. They are slave states. They're, again, those border states, and everything that Lincoln does is to keep those states happy. So one of the things that will be significant is that we can't instantaneously start calling for the end of slavery, because if that happens, those states will secede. And again, especially the state of Maryland will be a difficult thing to overcome. At that point, our capital would be in the Confederate States of America. So again, remained in the Union since the North did not start the war. And again, that's important. Critical to the Union cause. Those 3 states are going to send almost 300,000 Union Army to the Union Army. Lincoln, lots of quotes. I don't think there's probably any more misquoted president in the whole wide world than Abraham Lincoln, especially with the invention of the internet. And please always make sure you guys do a little checking before you take as fact what people say that presidents have said on the internet. But Lincoln most certainly said, hope to have God on his side, but he really hoped to have Kentucky. And that, again, is significant in that border state. West Virginia is going to leave Virginia in mid-1861 to join the Union. That's those mountain people. And that, again, is the significance of West Virginia and why it is such an important state. So 50% of Southern white population, or these border states, B, contain 50% of the South's white population. That is a key statistic, that 50% of everybody that was white in the South lived in Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland. So that means the other 50% are in all those other states, which draws on, or which will allow those Confederate states to draw on a lot less soldiers. And that will be key. When you start thinking about war, there are two things that are essential in making war from the dawn of time, Paleolithic man, to the 21st century. You have to have people to hold your weapons. Whoever has usually the most of those things are going to win. Obviously, in the 21st century, holding those weapons have changed miraculously. Now they're not really holding them. They're pushing buttons or driving drones, but you still have to have a person. And again, the Civil War will be determined a lot by that population, or the lack thereof, that population in the South. Lincoln used force at times to maintain control of those border states. He's going to declare martial law in Maryland specifically. Again, the point of that being Maryland was essential of keeping the Capitol building and the running of the government safe. He will send troops to West Virginia and Missouri, where many civil wars are going on, which we won't really get into. But politically speaking, on page 3, Lincoln had to keep the border states in mind when he made public statements. He couldn't really discuss slavery at this point. He really couldn't talk about the abolition of slavery. And this, again, is where people that want to pick apart Lincoln, this is the time period they pick him apart without fully understanding the context of which he was governing. He had to maintain those border states. And again, to do so meant he had to make this a war about preserving the Union. And that's what he begins the Civil War, that this is about preserving the United States of America, preserving that initial Revolutionary War, 13 colonies, what that all meant. And so he has to say, and he does say many times, that the North is not fighting to free slaves. And why does he have to say that? One, the Constitution protects slavery. And that, again, is significantly important. Emancipation edict would have driven out the border states instantly. If he would have made that statement, instantly those border states would have moved to the South. Lincoln is heavily criticized by abolitionists who see him as a sellout. And of course, again, those would be people like Horace Greeley. My paramount object is to save the Union. It is not neither to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it with freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others, I would also do that. So at the beginning of the Civil War, when everything is unsettled, the aim of President Lincoln is to save the Union. Slavery will be second, and it will become an essential part, but it has to come at the right time. And that right time is going to be Antietam. That will be the right time. So when we look at the Confederate assets, that means when we talk about war and we look at war in essential on a piece of paper, which is horrific to do because of the large loss of life, but it's one of the things that as we move through our AP course that we will look at time and time again. The Confederates have a few assets, one of them being a defensive war strategy. And every single time the Confederates have a large loss, Gettysburg, Antietam, any of those will be because the strategy of Lee switched from defense to offense. And as soon as that happens, the Confederate Army takes a beating. They only needed a stalemate. They have fewer troops that could defend a larger invading army, so the North had to invade, conquer, occupy. And until emancipation, many Southerners felt they had a moral cause, that slavery is protected by the Constitution, and that shouldn't be what it was about. The most important asset they had that kept them winning for the first 2 years, as the top of page 4, superb military officers. This is Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart. There's just a giant long list of them. And here's where we make that connection and that context. If we go all the way back to when we first were discussing how these colonies first were established, South was sparsely populated. They did not have public education. They did not have institutes of higher learning. What they had were military institutes, two of the longest and long-standing traditional military colleges, VMI, Virginia Military Institute, and the Citadel, both in the South. And all these people had gone there. We also then include West Point. Robert E. Lee was a graduate from West Point. He was an officer in the United States Army when the Civil War begins. He was asked to lead the Union troops, and he declined and decided to be the leader of the Army of Northern Virginia. So that's going to be the positive that the Confederates have. They are excellent horsemen and fairly good shots with their weapons. Confederates' chances for a victory are very small, right? Lack of significant industrial capacity. They cannot make stuff. They cannot make stuff. They can't make weapons. They can't make bullets. They can't make canteens. They can't make boots. They can't make blankets. They don't have anything that they can make. They can't make uniforms. At Gettysburg, when the Confederate soldiers march, I think I might have mentioned this, when the Confederate soldiers march, because they don't have trains to move their troops, so everywhere the Confederate army is moving, they're moving on their feet. And at this point in the army, they don't have underwear. So they're wearing woolen pants, marching 13 miles with no underwear. And for those of us of the female gender, that doesn't seem like a big deal. But to the male population, that is a horrific ordeal. Hard even to explain to the female sex how difficult marching 13 miles in wool pants without underwear feels to certain places on your body. Not good. So, blankets, as war dragged on, severe shortage of shoes. By 1862, more than half of the Confederate Army is fighting barefoot. Barefoot, which we Southerners enjoy going barefoot, but it's hard to fight a war, especially troop movement, when you're barefoot. Blankets, railroads were cut or destroyed by the Union Army. There are very few railroads in the South, but those will instantly be destroyed. I think I've mentioned this before. My hometown, where my family lives in Goldsboro, was a railroad depot. It's where lots of railroads came together, and Sherman marched straight down the center of my town, burned everything, tore up all the railroads. The few railroads that the South has, that is a strategic target that will be shot. Why and how could the Confederate Army have won? So these are things that we need to know as AP students, because we are asked about what did not happen almost as much as what did happen. Border states seceded. Again, that is essential for President Lincoln to keep those border states. If the upper Mississippi states had turned against the Union, that's us. That's Ohio, Illinois, Indiana. Northern public opinion demanded a peace treaty, and that will happen. There will be Northerners called Copperheads who will say, let's just stop. Let's just end this war. What are we fighting for? It's stupid. Let's end it. Let's be done with it. And 4D, please put a box around 4D, England and France. Now, again, because we're Americans, we do not have any kind of conception that England and France are waiting for our country to explode, but they are. Why are they waiting? Because we're their colony and they want us back. They don't give up stuff easily. And still to this date, in 1860, there had been no successful breakaway colony that had governed itself. And England and France see this as everything's going to blow up. So The South is courting both England and France to support it. The Union has a blockade. France and England honor that blockade. And again, that is significant. If France or England had thrown its support, and most especially its money and weapons and materials to the South, a completely different story. Completely 1,000% a different story. Northern advantages. These are gigantic. Population, 22 million people. South has 9, of which 3 million of that are slaves. So really they got 6 million people. Union Army's numerical advantages over Lee are 3-2 or sometimes 3-1. That's the military leadership. The Union Army for the first 2 years has horrible, awful, every kind of adjective for bad that you can think of military leaders. There are so many of them, even though in 1860 we don't yet have revolving doors, but that's what happens. Lincoln cannot find anyone that's good. They just keep going. There are at least 3 occasions when the Union Army could have crushed the Confederates, crushed them, and ended the war. But our Union leaders were too hesitant to throw all the troops into that. Also significant is A3, 20% of the Union Army is foreign born. And that's really important. Immigrants jump at this chance to be part of this army to prove their patriotism. That's what they're proving. There'll be entire units of Irish. There'll be entire units of Germans. We will have African-American troops, and all of them join this cause to prove their patriotism. For Irish who are being banned from things, the Know Nothing Party is against them. They see this as their kind of moment to rise to the occasion, and they will. Most assuredly. B, I cannot stress that more than enough. The Union had 3/4 of the nation's wealth. 3/4. I mean, that's and when we say 3/4 of the nation's wealth, I'm not just talking about dollars. They had dollars, but they also have the manufacturing, the shipping, bless you, and the banking. There are no banks in the South. All those Southern plantation owners have their money sitting in Northern banks. The North had 3/4 of the nation's railroads. Union controlled the sea, and again, that's essential. Controlling the sea, controlling the ports of entry. That would be Savannah and Charleston, and the idea of Union roused the North against the South. The Union forever. So the Confederacy begins. They draft a constitution that in many ways was identical, but the fatal fall again of the Confederacy is that it was created by secession, so people can leave it, and that will be the big issue. Jefferson Davis's idea of a strong central government was bitterly opposed to states' writers. And please note, Jeff Davis is not a states' writer. He is a strong central government, which again shoots bows and arrows into that this was fought for states' rights, because your leader, Jeff Davis, did not believe in that. He believed in a strong central government. Because of that, he's at odds with him quite often. So, the bottom of page 5 is European diplomacy. Europe is in a touchy situation, as is the North and the South. England, France, Austria-Hungary, almost all of them supported the Confederate cause because of the aristocracy. Why? It has nothing to do with slavery. It has to do with they hate democracy. The Union is a symbol of democracy. So if I'm the King of England, which now at this point, I'm not the King of England, I am Queen Victoria. If I'm Queen Victoria, I don't want to see this huge democracy flag flying across the Atlantic Ocean and having my subjects get too jumpy to move this democracy thing over. If I am the Austrian Habsburg Franz Ferdinand, I don't want anyone seeing the epitome of democracy in action and at work. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. Democracy is a threat. British government sympathize with the aristocracy south, and Europeans are going to sell weapons, warships, supplies to the Confederates. What's going to happen and what's going to change that are the people of these countries. The people of Britain say, stop. We're not supporting a nation that supports slavery. So when we talk about Europe supporting the Confederate States, it's not the people of Europe. It's the aristocracy. It's the absolutist rulers that see democracy as a threat. And that will be what they are working towards. Eventually, the people will speak, especially in Great Britain, and say, we are not sending our tax dollars to help preserve the institution of slavery. And that will flip in a year or two. So at the top of page 6, why does King Cotton fail the South? So this is a twofold story in and of itself. And it has to do with not diversifying. So I would assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, future farmers of America people, that in today's world, one of the most important things for farmers is diversification. That you don't just plant one crop and hope that one crop gets you through to the next year, because there has been too much history built around declining agriculture based on one crop. The South put all of their eggs, all of their seeds in one field called cotton, and that will be what happens. In 1861, Great Britain, who is the largest importer of cotton, says we got too much. This is the fear of farmers, is they overproduced and nobody needs their stuff anymore. And if you don't diversify, you still just got that one crop. So by the time Britain badly needed cotton again, Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, giving the North a mortal cause, and that's when the British people say we are not supporting the Confederacy. Working people, here's B3, working people in England and to some degree France supported North and hated slavery. So while their governments were supporting the Confederacy for the cause of trying to destroy democracy, the people of those nations, the working people, said, we do not support that. And eventually that's going to come to difficulty in those countries. On page 6, we're not going to go through that too much. You can read about the British diplomacy, how Britain walked a fine line of supporting the Confederacy. The same thing with, on page 7, France. Again, these are monarchies. These are people whose best interest is to remove democracy, so their nations are not tempted by democracy. But we're going to move down to the bottom of page 7, raising armies. Northern troops initially comprise of volunteers, and this will always be a problem for the United States of America until after World War II, is we do not keep a large standing army. And I know it sounds kind of crazy to think that this far removed from the good grief. Hello? Yes? I will. I will. Yes, I do. Will do. Okay. Bye-bye. Drop off your immunization form between passing periods. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't have one.
Okay.
I already got mine.
What?
I already did it.
But you have to have some form that you need to drop off. Same for you. Okay. I don't know.
Okay.
Just go talk to him in passing period. Go talk to him in passing period about shots. Okay. Don't be afraid. Shots don't hurt if that's what you're doing. If you're stalling. No, they don't.
Yes, they do. I got mine done. They're terrible. The third one's bad.
What shots were they?
I don't know.
Listen, people.
They weren't bad.
Shots.
The third one was.
Oh, come on.
Mine wasn't.
You have to relax your arm and don't look. Relax your arm, don't look.
It was one of those ones that was like made your arm numb for a couple of days. It was one of those.
Okay. Let me just say,
Felt my arm was
anybody ever have a typhoid shot before? Then no. Nobody's had a shot that makes your arm. How about when you're 5 years old and have a typhoid shot? That hurts. So I will tell you, typhoid shot, if you have to get one, it hurts. And it doesn't just make your arm numb. It makes your arm hurt for about 2 weeks. Just saying. And also, I cannot tell you how many times, I think I've said this before in class, where I'm sitting in class as a kid and a little guy goes by in his corpsman outfit and hollers in, everybody in the hallway, hug the wall, drop your shoulder, hug the wall, pew, 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 pew. I got so many shots, I don't even know what I was getting shots for. So, yes. What?
You just didn't know what you were doing.
No.
And then just don't
That, no,
Yeah, that's a little sketchy.
no, that's what happens. It could have been,
That's what
Finn.
I'm saying, that's a
It
little sketchy.
certainly could have been. Department of Defense controlled our lives. They told us what we could do, what we couldn't do. My goofiest one about going to a school, a Department of Defense school, a DOD run by the Department of Defense, that in my high school, we had a hair code. So the boys could not have hair on the collar and it had to be above their ears. Gosh, we had so many things. But we had a smoking area. And high schoolers, if you brought a note from your mom or dad, you could smoke. There was about 3,200 kids in this school. How many of you think their parent really filled out that form? Because this is 1979. There's no computers. There's no anything. We also, they had the most ridiculous, and this is the military running a school, the most ridiculous ways to turn in being absent. I'm telling a lot of tales. We had numbers. I was 5888. That was my number. My name wasn't put on anything, just my number. And so kids entered attendance. Kids. Slide someone a couple of bucks, erased your number. Because the teachers didn't really know your number, they knew your name, so you would not be marked absent. Everybody wanted attendance duty because they made a lot of money. A lot of money. A lot. My high school that high school that I went to was an old office building leftover from World War II. It was a giant building. My high school was a 3-story building. There was, again, and this is just 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. There was 3,200 of us. And so we didn't have a gym. We didn't have a cafeteria. What else did we have? So we had to have gym. So when we had gym, we walked to the base gym, or we walked to the bowling alley, or we walked to the archery field, or we walked to the track. So there were always kids moving. So you just moved. You had someone skip. I don't feel like going to German 3 today. Erase my name and I'll just walk with everybody that's going to the archery field, or I'll just walk. Yeah. That's what happens when the military runs schools. You get shots you don't know about. Without permission, they just give you shots. Yeah. And in that shot, because that was for my dad when we were moving to Okinawa and we had to have all kinds of shots. I somehow got ahead of my sister in my shot, so I had to pretend to get a shot so she would get her shot. Yeah, shots. And now I'm at the age where I have to get all those old people shots, like shingles shots and pneumonia shots. Shingles shot hurt because they pinch your fat. It's an underneath shot. Yeah, I have plenty of fat, but it was not a good shot. All right, last 5 minutes. We're going to talk about raising armies, but get your shots, people. You need to make sure that you do that. Initially, Northern armies comprised of volunteers. Each state was given a quota, and we'll do this often. Every war we start, and this is where I started this conversation, every war we start, we never start with a strong standing army. We always have to ask states to call people up. Those of you that have family members, longtime family members in Sullivan County, draft boards. I am sure some of you know one of your male relatives that's set on a draft board. Draft boards in World War II, not so bad. Draft boards for the Korean War, not so bad. Draft boards for Vietnam, a different kind of a draft board. That one would have been, if you have any family members that set on those draft boards, they probably went through a lot of stress, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So in 1863, Congress passed the first ever federal conscription law in U.S. history. So you know that is something to commit to your brain. Conscription law means you have to have a law to be drafted. So you guys are all of you 17 yet? 17? So you should have gotten your thing to register for the Selective Service. And if you have not, you probably need to make sure that you do that, because you can't get any federal aid grant money if you're not registered for Selective Service. All you have to do is give your name, your birthday, and then you go into a big draft hopper. I find it really, really un-American that females don't have to register for Selective Service. I wish that came about as well, because what happens again is if you don't register for Selective Service, you're excluded from grants in your FAFSA. If you're a male, I'm fairly certain it asks you if you've registered for Selective Service. Nothing for females, and I don't think that's fair, that you are excluded from government monies if you don't register, and females don't have to register. I keep hearing that every now and then that's going to change, that females are going to have to register. But if there wasn't a negative reaction that could happen to you for not registering for the Selective Service, I wouldn't feel that way. But I wouldn't feel as strongly about it as I do. But because something negative can happen to you if you don't, but you should have gotten a postcard. You guys have not gotten any postcards about registering for Selective Service. You have to do it by the time you're 18. Okay. Again, at the bottom of page 7, before you flip the page, because this is what's going to cause a gigantic, humongous riot in New York, which allows me again to talk about an awesome movie, The Gangs of New York. Unfair. The policy was unfair, because if you could scrounge up $300, you could pay someone to take your place. And this is the beginnings of a long history the United States has with the poorest of us fighting for the rest of us. Same thing's going to happen in Vietnam. In Vietnam, if you stayed in post-secondary education, you could avoid the war. So the generation that would have fought in the Vietnam War, so that would be people, let's say I'm 56, so that would be people like 67 and above, have the highest percentage of PhDs of any other segment of the population. Because if they could stay in school, they wouldn't be drafted. And so again, that lends to the fact that there will be a lot of poor people taking the place of those that are unable to attend post-secondary. The draft is most hated in Democratic strongholds of the North. The New York draft riot in 1863 will be sparked by Irish Americans. 500 people are going to die in that riot. 500. And a large percentage of those are going to be African Americans. They're going to be lynched on light poles. They're going to be burned. Buildings are going to be burned. And the enlistment, again, will be always a crucial thing. There'll be about 200,000 deserters of all classes in the North. The South will be very similar. The difference being the North, because of their population, can handle that desertion, as opposed to the South that cannot. In 1860 to 1865, it's much easier to desert. You just walk off. You leave. Again, we don't have ways of connecting people. I know oftentimes we think of desertion, a derelict of duty, which it most assuredly is, especially when you take an oath. But I always feel there has to be some kind of small part of your heart that has to feel for those people in those situations fighting. We don't have any words back in 1863 for post-traumatic stress syndrome. We called it all kinds of names, shell-shocked. But the human psyche really reacts different to those types of things in warfare.